everyone.
Hello.
I'm Elizabeth Carney. I'm the chair of the Business and Leadership Forum here at the Commonwealth Club, and I'm here to welcome you. We have a really exciting international panel today that stretches from here in San Francisco all the way over to Europe and into Oceania at New Zealand. They'll join us by Zoom. So I want to get us started. There's a couple of housekeeping things. I don't have to tell anyone to turn off their phones, but I would like to say hold your questions until we have our mic set up so that you can come and ask questions directly. We care about having the speakers speaking as well as the answers both recorded. We really care a lot about the recording in our processes. And you will have also available finding it out on the Commonwealth Club website a couple of days after. So you can revisit those special ideas that you discovered as a part of this. We have lots of thanking to do. There's regenerative organic wine that's being served by Robert Hall. Many of you may know Far West Fungi. It's a organic mushroom grower and shops, and they're going to make mushroom soup for us after our program. The hard work of the program has been accomplished. So with that, I would like to invite up the panel and recommend that Amir start us off. Please join us.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that warm welcome, and thank you to the Commonwealth Club and of World Affairs for hosting this event for us. I'm happy to see you all today in the audience, and those of you at home. We have over 200 participants today, so if you're missing it, this will be recorded, so looking forward to the discussion to come. Over the next 88 minutes, we're going to explore 3 different topics. First being where AI is already doing good for the climate, health, and investing. Then it's important to take a pause and identify the risks and guardrails that accompany those positive benefits. And then we're going to end with discussing how AI can accelerate multi-sector solutions. So without further ado, I want to introduce my expert panel who are able to join us today, both in person and online. First, we have Stacy Lawson, who is the co-founder of Positive AI Labs and Benevolent AI Future. We have Craig Wickner of Farmland LP, who is a managing partner. And we have Ravi Jain, who was previously the Chief Technology and Product Officer at Tapestry, which is associated with Google X's Moonshot for the electric grid. And now he's currently working for Google X's Stealth project. And finally, our last panelist in person is Abby Young of Bay Area Air District, and she is the Climate Protection Manager. At home, we have Dr. Ihi, who is the leader of the Atua Matua tribe in New Zealand. We have Madison Evans, who is the Director of Generation Investment Management, joining us from the UK. And we have Paul Herman, who is the CEO of HIP Investor Portfolios, who is joining us from France. So that was a lot of words, kind of wanting to lighten it up a little bit. So what we want to start from the audience. Again, I want to remind you guys, this is interactive. There's going to be a chance for Q&A for both in person and online. But to start this off, I wanted to ask you guys in the audience a question. On a scale of 1 to 10, using your fingers, how would you rate AI for good in your world? So obviously the higher is better. And I want you to hold up, just a show of hands, 1 to 10. And if you're using just one finger, I want to remind you that this is being recorded. So try to avoid the middle one. So let's start. What do you guys think? Is AI doing good in your world? Let's see. All right, a mixture. I would say an average of 7, based on just doing quick math. And Paul can maybe let us know on what the chat is bringing in. But it's good to know that we're sitting in a room of positivity and knowing that even with accelerating applications, a positive light is there. So with that, we can start with round 1, which is going to be around the topic of where AI is doing good in your work. So Stacy, why don't you start us off? You co-founded Positive AI Labs and Benevolent Future. What can you tell us about the tangible improvements that you're seeing in AI for good? And within your work, what are you advocating?
Thank you, Amir, and thank you to the Commonwealth Club and for all of you for joining us today. So one of the organizing principle for Positive AI Labs is actually to help guide and align AI for human flourishing. And the impetus behind it is that given we have a very urgent window to have humans influence AI training, the estimates are about 3 to 5 years, not too much longer than that, before the models become both self-training and also agentic, and humans are out of the loop. And given that today, most of the alignment work that's being done for AI is around safety, so we certainly want the models to do no harm, but that's a necessary and not sufficient condition. So most of the labs today are focused on the left hand of this bell curve. Actually, I would say that they're mostly focused on the middle of the bell curve. So they're in an arms race for compute and for capabilities, making sure the models do a really good job at technical things like coding and math and science. And there's investment in safety, or what we call left tail alignment. But there's very little right now that's happening related to what we call right tail alignment or positive alignment for human values, for ethical clarity or moral clarity, and for flourishing. And so PAL's mission, and the reason we started it, was to actually, because there's a market failure, to bring in a trusted third party who can actually build the infrastructure for training and alignment around human flourishing and values alignment, and do that in a very pluralistic way. So we're targeting the tough, messy problems of human dilemmas like mental health and conflict resolution and peace building, and doing it with a pluralistic set of contributors all over the world. So culturally sensitive, and bringing in lots of different perspectives and lenses on wisdom from various traditions and disciplines and cultural perspectives, in order to make sure that AI is ready to support humanity before the training of it gets out of our hands.
Stacy, one quick follow-up question. So I know that AI can be applied into different industries, whether it be construction, health, coding. Where do you feel that ethical alignment, in what industry do you feel like that is most needed and lacking in the moment?
I would say it's something that's kind of foundational and underpins a lot of industries, but right now the one big area that we're really seeing it is in conflict resolution, peace building, okay. On-the-ground scenarios where AI is being consulted in life or death situations, mental health, teen suicide, et cetera, and not doing a very good job. So.
Thank you for that insight. Now let's switch over to our online audience. Dr. Ihi, you lead the Atua Matua in the Aotearoa, New Zealand. When thinking about AI for good, how does it benefit the integration of indigenous knowledge and climate justice that you and your ancestors have led for generations?
Kia ora, ko te tuatahi a Ngāmihi ki te local tribe, the Ramaytush people of San Francisco, for allowing us to come and talk on their land, albeit by Zoom. To the rest of the panel there, nice to see you and to have this opportunity to talk next to you. For the crowd, I suppose it's never too early to be drinking wine at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, but get into it. And I think to our MC, I've got to apologise. I stressed the shit out of him by giving my full name, which is more like a sentence. So I think that's where got him a little bit confused there. But never mind. AI for good from an Indigenous perspective is more the other direction, really, of what we can bring to AI. We've had 60,000 years of running the longest continuous environmental monitoring program on Earth. So the observations, the ceremonies, the intergenerational transmission that we represent and could contribute, should we choose, is pretty significant. The Atua Matua framework that our MC was talking about there it's a health framework we built in 2007, and we were struggling to get any health changes in tribal groups. So we changed to making the programs about environmental science. And we moved from having 5 people turn up to 500 people turning up because they wanted to learn about the environment that made them who they are in their tribal districts. AI represents a great opportunity to align some of the architecture influences next to what we know as Indigenous people to develop new initiatives to look at ways that Indigenous sovereign knowledge could be protected. It's a whole range of spaces that we could go into with AI, as long as it's not part of a toggle that's ticked or pushed or an overlay, but something that's part of the infrastructure of how AI is built. So we have a lot of data. We have a number of programs that we've been building for the Atua Matua since 2007. 18 months ago, we started a new initiative of Native AI for Humanity that looks at building Indigenous knowledge networks that are nodes where each Indigenous group has control and sovereignty over its own spaces. However, the foundational principle remains pretty simple, that capital doesn't purchase any company governance rights. We keep that. Drop the mic.
That is a big risk, and I feel like that's a big risk in all of AI integration. Our data is being used to power and train these models. I think it's important that we have this discussion, especially on how to best apply our knowledge that is creating value for hopefully everybody and not just those who set up the structure of these AI machine learning models. But continuing the conversation, thank you, Dr. Ihi, for your input there. Madeline from Generation Investment Management in the UK, how are you seeing the AI influence your own portfolio construction decisions and stewardship?
Great, thank you everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. This is also a lovely homecoming for me because although I've been in London for 16 years, I grew up in the Bay Area, so nice to see you. So for those of you who don't know us, Generation is a pure play sustainable investing firm managing around 25 billion across public and private markets platforms. We were co-founded in 2004 by David Blood and the US Vice President Al Gore, with a vision for a sustainable world and a mission to pursue that through both our investment and our advocacy. And I say that as context because when it comes to sustainability goals, we believe AI is a foundational technology that will reshape the economy as profoundly as prior industrial and digital revolutions. So to kick us off, I wanted to frame some of how we are thinking about AI across 3 pillars. We believe AI's net impact will depend on governance, incentives, and capital allocation decisions made now. And this represents where we see opportunities for the wider investment community to focus. As long-term investors, first we focus on sustainable use cases for AI. I think we've been looking for sustainable use cases for a long time. And so AI and AI native companies are just a driver of that. It doesn't change. We're looking for technologies and business models that reduce carbon intensity, improve system resilience, and broaden access. Secondly, we believe governance and transparency are essential. We're looking for companies that embed strong governance, data integrity to the data point, and security safeguards. But finally, there are significant longer-term design choices that we need to make today about AI. This goes to the risk mitigation and flourishing question raised by Stacey. AI's rising energy and water demands pose real risks to climate goals, particularly given data center expansion and grid constraints. And AI raises urgent questions around privacy, disinformation, labor displacement, and concentration of power. These long-term considerations are factoring into our stewardship today. Not all, but for example, we've laid out clear expectations for our listed equity companies regarding fossil fuel data centers and emissions, fossil fuel free, data centers and emissions transparency. So I would say we don't have all the answers. This shows a little bit about how we're thinking about this across allocation and stewardship and advocacy, of course. And the critical question that I'm asking myself is, what do we need AI to do to help us achieve the sustainable world that we want? And it's critical for investors to use their agency. And so with that, I think over to Ravi.
Yeah, Madeline, thank you for that. That was really insightful. You spoke about resource allocation. This is kind of a great segue into Ravi, who is the lead, former lead chief technology and product officer of Tapestry, which is part of Google's Moonshot, with dealing with the electrical grid. So Ravi, what does AI good look like for you, especially when looking at bringing modernization to our electrical grid infrastructure?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here, and also happy Earth Day. So this is a great time to have this panel. So I'll just give you a little bit of context about X and how we operate, so that it'll sort of set the stage for what we're doing. So X is an Alphabet company. It is sort of a peer of Google, and it's called the Moonshot Factory. And think of us as a high-risk, high-reward incubator. We don't work on problems or businesses directly related to Google necessarily, but looking at creating big new businesses. So the way we operate is we look at a huge problem in the world and finding a radical solution to that, and then building the breakthrough technology to solve that problem. So the poster child for that is a huge problem in the world is that millions of people are killed or are injured every year in road traffic accidents. And some part of that is because of human error. So the radical solution is, can we get rid of human error? And the breakthrough technology is the self-driving car. And typically when we start on these moonshots, we go from people thinking they're impossible or crazy, and then now, of course, you can get a Waymo in the city. And so that's sort of the context for what we do. But another part of this that we do is we sort of try to blend purpose and profit. Mm-hmm. So the huge problems for the world are things that really are big problems for the world. And one example is the availability of energy. Mm-hmm. And, we want to look at how, as the world's moving away from fossil fuels to more electrification, how can energy be made affordable and reliable and available? And with that, we started looking at the electric grid. The electric grid is the world's largest machine, 100 years old, hasn't been disrupted in decades. And yet it's critical because it's how we can distribute clean energy, renewable energy. It used to be that the cost of producing clean electrons was prohibitive compared to that of fossil fuels. That has dropped in the last 5 years and 10 years. Now the issue is that the grid itself can become a bottleneck because it was never designed for this kind of highly decentralized, highly variable energy sources. So to manage that, really the only way to handle that is using AI. And that's important because when we're using electricity, of course, it's better than burning fossil fuels right at the end point. But electricity itself generates about a quarter of the world's carbon. Mm. And if we can integrate renewable energy into the grid more efficiently, then that can have a big impact. And it's one of the big drivers for the huge problems that we're looking at, and also for the purpose part of what we do. So in that, if you're going to try to integrate renewable energy into the traditional electric grid, the only way to do that is really with AI, to handle the variability of renewable energy, its decentralization, and the fact that the grid is built with a certain type of architecture, which is not necessarily always going to be the best. So that's what we're working on. And one of the things that translates into grid intelligence, grid planning, grid operations, I can describe that. But as you step back from that, you see that you can see that the solutions we're developing could be applicable to other areas as well. For instance, for food security or for looking at climate resilience, and and those opportunities are also really important. So I'll end with that.
No, thank you for that, Ravi. You bring up that energy utilities are around 1/3 of the world's emissions. Large emitters. Abby, this is where her expertise can come in as the climate protection manager at the Bay Area Air District, also involved in launching the Bay Area Climate Action Plan recently. So if you haven't had the chance, go check that out. But Abby, how can AI accelerate pollution reduction and improve public health?
Great. Thanks for that question, Amira. And particularly, thank you for including a public agency on this panel. So the Air District, we're a regional agency, and our core mission is to ensure that everyone in the 9-county Bay Area has access to healthy and clean air to breathe. And by the way, I do appreciate that you're all enjoying our product today. So there's that. For free, exactly. So the Air District is a very old, large, regulatory institution. And like many, maybe most public agencies, where no one would accuse us of being super nimble, right? So we're behind the curve on this whole AI thing, but it looks like it's catching on. So we're starting to think about how can we use AI to help help us deliver on our mission and help us find efficiencies that will allow us to, perhaps better direct some of our resources. So some of the work that we do includes research, air quality modeling, air quality monitoring. We give out hundreds of, sometimes we give out hundreds of millions of grants and incentives each year. We also permit and inspect over 10,000 individual sources of air pollution in the Bay Area. So there's a tremendous amount of data analysis work that we have to do, and we have quite a backlog in our permitting department. And so our permitting operation right now is piloting some AI tools to see if we can find some efficiencies and help with that backlog. And I know that we're have a lot more to talk about, so I'll kind of wrap it up by saying that I think the Air District comes to this conversation from a place of cautious optimism. And we can dig into that a little more as the conversation evolves.
As this conversation progresses, we will be covering the risks that go with AI that should not be ignored. But as we progress through, we've been talking about energy utility, ethics, but how does it apply to food systems? We have here Craig, a managing partner at Farmland LP, and you're focused on sustainable farmland and organic food systems. How is AI in your world advancing your overall mission of providing sustainable and, organic food systems in that way?
Great. Craig Wishner with Farmland LP. Glad to give you us as an example, but I think everyone here and the people listening are very interested or actively involved in impact-oriented businesses. And if you compare businesses that kind of don't look necessarily for impact, they tend to be, they're either profitable or they're not. They're generating a lot of profits or a little, and it's pretty easy to characterize them. They're very linear. When you look at impact businesses, you have to deliver on the first metric. You have to deliver profits. And you have a whole host of complexity on top of that. You could be looking at carbon sequestration or ecosystem services or food security or pollinator habitat. There's just an extraordinary amount of additional dimensions, and really everyone cares about a different component of that or different combinations of components. And I consider it like, okay, businesses normally are black and white, and impact companies are the rainbow of everything. It's more challenging. It's more complicated to run an impact business. You've got two businesses in essence to run, and one of them is actually more complex. This is exactly where AI shines. And AI is your friend. And the more you run towards it and bring it into your business, it's going to help not only your own organization, but how it connects to the rest of the world. So I want to acknowledge everyone for doing impact businesses and being interested in impact. We've been actively involved in this and looking forward to sharing some stories. So Farmland LP buys conventional farmland, and we convert it to organic, regeneratively managed farmland as an investment fund. We've been doing this for 16 years. We have about 20,000 acres under management, about $350 million worth of farmland. And we set out from the beginning to buy high-quality farmland with climate change as a screen on it, and apply healthy soil biology practices to farmland, essentially convert it from the chemical monocropping system to a much more diverse crop rotation, healthy soil biology based system. And that's more complex. There's software available if you're growing corn and soy in the Midwest. There's not software available if you're growing 40 different crops in 3 different states with multiple people on it. So we have to go from accounting systems. And so how do you design spreadsheets and reporting systems for tracking not just the normal crop profits, but across 40 different crops and across 20 different farmers on that land, and also track the impact, like carbon being sequestered on different aspects of it, crop rotations varying from year to year. There's a lot more complexity to it, and then designing, like working to monetize those things as well, like carbon sequestration. Microsoft actually invested with us to help support our efforts to basically make it so that it was easier to turn that carbon that we're naturally sequestering in the soil into carbon credits. We started 16 years ago. We thought, hey, we're going to sequester a ton of carbon. It'll be a great revenue source. Haven't gotten a dime in 16 years. We're finally at a scale, and we're finally able to pull the data together and get the protocols so that we can actually get great carbon credits. And part of it is doing something we do anyway. It's all actually stuff we do anyway. And the picture that you're seeing there on the left-hand side are orchards before we bought them. And this is the standard way of managing orchards, which is to spray out the understory so you don't have any issues and just feed fertilizer, etc., and harvest the things. We look at this as an integrated biological system, and so we plant cover crops in the middle. We plant pollinator habitat in the middle. And the USDA actually gives us grants to plant the pollinator habitat. But the conventional farmers don't want to do that. We do that. We're now able to measure the carbon and in the final stages of getting these approved to the highest international standards, so that it'll be an additional revenue source for us. Managing all that complexity, AI really makes that possible.
Greg, thank you for that tangible example. One thing that we integrate at HIP is our climate threat resilience ratings that actually look at the natural lands. And we did find, monocrop cultures, especially in Iowa, there's higher instances of, lesser instances of resiliency towards climate disasters. So this tangible example of how AI can organize multiple different systems, multiple moving parts, and help the operator, director make more informed decisions is something that should be known, despite all of the risks, which we will be touching upon. But before further ado, I do want to introduce our last panelist on joining us from France, CEO of HIP Investor Portfolios, Paul Herman. So Paul Herman, can you take us away?
Great. Thank you, Amir. And thanks to each and every one of the panelists sharing their valuable time today. And, Abby brought up, thanks for having a government agency here. But what we have online and in the room is a multi-sector group of talented people solving problems that are multi-sector with solutions that are multi-sector by talent that is multi-sector. So I appreciate everyone here being an action taker and a problem solver. I'm Paul Herman from Hip Investor. Thanks, Elizabeth, for orchestrating and producing us all together. And in terms of AI for good today, Amir introduced this description. And so what a product set, a data set on AI is not only the AI that's generating the climate weather models every day as to whether we bring an umbrella outside or not, or where we go on our next trip, but it's combining 1.5 million toxic sites. So yes, there are 1.5 million toxic sites, Superfund sites, old gas stations, oil refineries that all have a risk of seeping into the river. And one of my earliest experiences was working at the Hanford nuclear site, which became a Department of Energy site after being a Department of Defense site, producing plutonium hockey pucks for missiles and tritium triggers. And that those stainless steel, single shell stainless steel tanks and double shell stainless steel tanks eventually leaked into the Columbia and are polluting the Columbia River. So as Dr. Ehi has introduced, there's 60,000 years of lessons of observation from he and his ancestors. And so that is capturable today, and it's combinable with, Madeline will show us in a little bit, a tool called Climate Trace, which is observing satellite emissions globally around all of these sites. So it's not just the 3,000 counties that we live in or the 84,000 census tracts that are our neighborhoods and schools and hospitals. And it's not only the 140,000 muni bond entities that issue muni bonds that are only cities and counties, but also water utilities. But it's the 1.5 million toxic sites. That's a risk multiplier that AI can help us model and identify and find a multi-sector solution. And there's resilience factors, as Craig talked about, farmland and forest. More forest actually helps create climate resilience. More newer buildings are more resilient than older buildings, but also community resilience when people practice being together. And so in a hurricane that hit New Orleans a few years ago, Walmart trucks were on the way with Pop-Tarts and beer because that's what people buy after a hurricane. So using AI to help us model that, as well as future climate disasters, but solutions and coordinate that will be helpful. So back to you, Amir.
Thank you for that, Paul. So I'm hearing a lot about how AI is creating value, especially in terms of multi-sector solutions or access to information and understanding at an accelerating rate. We're going to continue the discussion here. This was great hearing from all of our panelists. I just want to dive in a little bit deeper. Ravi, you spoke about the electrical grid and how to unlock various complexities with the moving parts, especially with older infrastructure and newer infrastructure. We know from your discussion that it's perhaps not necessarily ready today, but where do you see improvements in, especially AI related to the grid, in the near future, 2030, 2040, 2060? So we'd love to hear more about that from you.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, a lot of the solutions that we worked on and are working on are being deployed or trialed. For instance, if you think about the grid in terms of intelligence and planning and operations, planning tools are being trialed and developed for countries, for instance, for the planning for the electric grid of the national grid of Chile. And other partners. I think I'll give an example of something that's very tangible and maybe very easy to relate to is the issue of forecasting. Yeah. And I think we talked about that earlier. So with a lot of renewable energy, it's really important to be able to forecast that. If you have a fossil fuel plant like a coal plant and so on, you can very easily forecast what it's going to produce because it depends on what you put in, and that's how much energy it's going to generate. But with solar and wind, it's much more variable. So the need for accurate forecasting becomes very critical. And a lot of that is driven, for instance, by weather. And forecasting weather is one of those things that's really difficult, and people have worked on for forever. But what's happened is in the last 5 years or so, there's been a sea change in how forecasting is done for weather. It used to be done by very complicated physics-based models that only large labs or meteorology departments could run. But now, those models that forecast can be done using AI. And the AI, we've shown that those models the AI-based models are not only as accurate or more accurate than the traditional numerical forecasts, but in fact are much faster. So something that a forecast model that might take months to produce can now be done in my lab, on a laptop or on a GPU or on a CPU in minutes. And that's an example of how AI is being applied in practice, because these forecasts are not only really important for the electric grid, but they have tremendous applications elsewhere. For instance, in food security, one of the examples that our own outfit didn't do this, but another part of Google did this, is using these kind of forecasts to predict the onset of the monsoon rains in India. And the monsoons are very critical for Indian agriculture, and in fact for the Indian economy, probably account for a significant input for the Indian economy. And traditional forecasts haven't been very reliable, but with these new forecasts, we did a pilot where we sent out notifications of when the rains would arrive to farmers using SMS text messages. And I think it was millions of farmers. And, that information is critical. If the rains come too early, then that has a problem. If they come too late, then your seeds die. And we were able to show that we could not only send out much more accurate forecasts, but they could actually even forecast a dry period during the monsoons. And so this was joint work with the University of Chicago and Berkeley. And they did the economic analysis to show that improved forecast had an impact of $20 per hectare of arable land. If you multiply that by the amount of arable land in India, it's a huge economic impact. And of course, aside from that, the benefits to the farmers in terms of operational efficiencies and so on. So this is an example where these things are really being put into practice, and they can go much beyond just the grid. But you can have impacts for the technology being developed for one sector being applied across sectors. And that's where what we were talking about in terms of having a multi-sector approach. I think AI can help do that, because the tech can be applied if done properly across sectors.
Yeah, and so interesting, the application of surveying people who have knowledge on the ground, those who are most involved with the work process, like Indian farmers. I think that's a lot of, especially with our climate action work, we can estimate the community needs and wants, but how else would you know other than cold calling them or texting them? But then you ask yourself, how do I organize and what do I do with all of this information? So it is very powerful to see, that accelerating application of AI and how it can organize and essentially accelerate the time between, I think I can do this, versus I'm just going to go ahead and do it. So I hope it inspires action makers throughout. Thank you for that tangible example. So moving on to Madeline, who's joining us from the UK. You spoke upon the need for stewardship of having transparent AI, especially around data integrity. As you're utilizing AI, can you give us an example of how portfolio companies create positive climate impact and financial value using AI, keeping in mind those limitations with data integrity and transparency?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we're going to hear a lot of incredible examples, and there were too many to count. I'll share one recent one, maybe a bit more of a non-obvious example. It's a company called IFS. So IFS is an operating platform for asset-heavy industries like manufacturing, construction, aviation. It's like a purpose-built alternative to generalist ERP like SAP or Oracle. And we invested in the company in December 2024 because we saw the climate impact potential. maybe not one that others had seen, but with the sustainable investment lens, we did. So asset-heavy industries collectively account for over 70% of global GHG emissions. And we estimated that their AI-driven optimization capabilities, which work on top of large data sets about these enterprises' assets, maintenance schedules, people locations, etc., have the potential to influence approximately 2.6% of global CO2 emissions, assuming the tools are scaled 100% across key markets. So big goal, but very inspiring for the investment team and for the company. IFS enables decarbonization by reducing fuel and waste through three primary levers. So the first is helping their customers reduce fuel and energy consumption. That's through optimization of field technician routing. Customer evidence shows that that can reduce travel time and associated emissions by up to 35%. Secondly, extending asset lifetimes via predictive maintenance. That cuts unplanned outages by 30%. It extends asset life cycles, in one case avoiding 200 aircraft engine shop visits annually through digital twin technology. And then enabling remanufacturing, which is making it easier for manufacturers to recycle inputs into new goods. I didn't know, but this requires a very bespoke type of ERP. And that increases circularity, reduces total life cycle waste, associated embodied emissions. I think, as Craig mentioned earlier, in impact business, you still have to deliver profit. And IFS is exciting to us because it represents a class of companies where positive impact does go hand in hand with financial value, because the underlying logic of what decarbonizes also reduces clients' operating cost. This is made possible in whole or in part by IFS' use of AI. They have more and more intelligent optimization tools that are being progressively embedded into the core platform. You can think about optimized routing, easier and better with AI, automating scheduling, predicting equipment failure, and ideally optimizing value chain decisions in real time. And so we are now collaborating with the company to measure the real world emissions avoided by these industrial AI capabilities. To the data point, it's actually pretty exciting when you have a software platform that has access to those underlying data points, because given the right emissions factors, which is where other sources of data, and actually interestingly Climate Trace, we think is a very interesting source of data, which I'll talk about as well, come in, you can start to see how you might be able to model and then potentially also predict more clearly the potential climate impact of decisions alongside predicting the cost impacts as well. And I think with that, I'll pass it back to Craig.
Yeah, thank you, Madeline, for that really in-depth example. I really enjoyed hearing about how IFS is using, not only like their own data, but how they're using it to organize and accelerate operational decisions. That example is very tangible. Craig, can you give us an example of how you're using AI for advanced analytics, like you were speaking about perhaps in areas of soil health, yield, or overall diverse ecosystems?
Glad to. So maybe I'll answer this as a CEO rather than. So I ran software companies for 10 years before running Farmland LP, starting Farmland LP 16 years ago. And one of the challenges of running a software company is you're managing a bunch of software engineers. And usually the software engineers will say, oh, that's too difficult, or oh, it's going to take a long time, and it can't be done, or I'll get back to you in 6 weeks. And you're like, no, it can't take this long. And and I actually specifically did not learn how to code when I was running software companies, because I didn't want to stick my fingers in it. I didn't want to actually be that manager who would micromanage and say, oh, I have a better idea than you. I'm going to do it. Anyway, so fast forward now 16 years is these AI tools, which make it so, and wherever you are, everyone is like in a different part of the development of AI. You might know about AI, or you might use the chat window, or now you might be using Cowork. Sorry, I'm not. Robbie's with Google. I'm talking about Claude. And
never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Excellent answer. And Cowork was pretty amazing, because all of a sudden it put the stuff that I was doing in Claude code, like in a found using this DOS window, putting it in a directory and having it analyze a bunch of data was really extraordinary. It was like game changing compared to just asking questions in chat. And then CoWork kind of brought that to all the business people. But I still use Claude Code because it's just extraordinary to really be able to actually do the code. And here's why I'm talking about this. What the technology today enables people to do is to say, I would love to generate a report that covers these 3 different things. Build it for me. Show me an example, and it will build it for you. And so it is, and it's literally like that amount of text. It actually turns your employees, your team, into software programmers. Farmland LP, we have 11 people in fund management and 45 people in farmland management. We're one of the 14 largest farmland management firms in the US. But I don't have a programming team. Like if I was a software company, I'd have 10, 20, 30 programmers, and I would have spent an extraordinary amount of money doing software development. We don't. We've figured it out. But now I have 10 software engineers working for me with great expertise in a wide variety of fields, and they're working whenever I want them to. And I literally have 26 different projects. I'm running 5, 8 at a time. And when some hit roadblocks, I go, I got to work on that one, and I got to catch it up because there's a dependency that I need more data over here, or I need to work on my master data over here, or I need a reporting platform. So we built a reporting platform last week, and now we're launching this incredible master data system for us. Sorry, this is all like inside baseball and whatever. But 1, it's fun. 2, you're getting like I wish my business could do this. And then you do it. And it's almost like magic. And the pace of innovation too over the past few months has just absolutely been extraordinary. So really, like for an organization, it's actually really training our team, like the other people in our team. We hire really smart people, but they're not programmers, But now the people who work on spreadsheets or the people who do farming or something else, they know what they need. Now they can just ask Claude for it. And there are incredible opportunity. Madeline was talking about asset-heavy businesses, and the farming is an asset-heavy business, right? But there's also a tremendous, extraordinary amount of technology in terms of running these businesses. I also happen to be on the board of a gene editing company called Cibus, and Cibus has like gene editing. I consider it organic friendly because you're not putting in foreign genes on it. You're just like, hey, that plant over there defends itself against mold and fungus really well, and you can just like make one little change on a base pair, and has now that gene resistance trait, that disease resistance trait. It's really miraculous. Those kinds of changes are possible and amazing now. I worry about that kind of stuff from a climate change perspective and a food security thing. Like, yes, we need to manage farmland well, and I think we need to really apply these technologies to things that are going to like really make every difference possible so that we have as little suffering as possible going forward.
Thank you for that. And, I am a big believer, too, in regard to the acceleration of doing actions, being a doer, getting out of the thinking phase into the action phase. And it's so interesting to hear these multi-sector approaches on how people are getting things done in a more meaningful manner. And as we will discuss in the risks section later on, are we using too much compute? Are we using too much power? Do I really need to ask AI to do these things? So these are kind of some of the things that we'll explore. But before getting to that, we'll move on to Stacy. And what I wanted to ask you is, Can I hear about one positive use case that AI is doing better in, especially in regard to evaluation of, reducing harm or the improvement of human flourishment?
Absolutely. So I thought I would bring forward an example from one of the partners that is helping us build human flourishing evals and benchmarks for AI. Their name is IFIT, which is the Institute for Integrated Transitions, and they're working on the front line in fragile communities that are coming out of authoritarianism or conflict of different types and helping them build stability. And so this is kind of a neat a really powerful human lens in that when we think of conflict resolution, we think of humanitarian issues, but there's actually a whole set of cascades that fall from that. So economic stability in the region, which means more investment in things like climate or healthy food systems or education, all of which ultimately affect in the downstream way human flourishing. And this group is working in communities like the one shown here, where in fact there are cartels active, there's local law enforcement issues, there's a lot of conflict that's destabilizing the area. They're helping to hopefully bring more stability. And they're working on the front lines in life and death situations, and they're more and more, their folks are starting to access AI to get guidance. And so they said, well, let's do some research to see how well is AI actually doing in that. So if you look at the next slide here, they did a research report that looked at all of the current frontier models and how well across their various conflict zones AI actually brought best practices or what would be considered truly wise or leading edge approaches to these very life and death conflict situations. And the average across the various models was about 27%. Feel free to take a look at the deeper report. It was quite interesting. So what they found was that, as we often, probably all of us as users see, is that the AI would immediately come back with something that sounded really good, but was pretty superficial. That there wasn't a deeper querying, there wasn't a deeper exploration of the cultural nuance and the critical, nuanced human perspectives that were happening on the ground that were about political and power situations, sometimes gender equity issues and other things, that the models just don't have that capacity yet. And so this is an area where they are now helping us build the benchmark along with a number of other leading conflict resolution firms and organizations to bring in much more nuanced, culturally appropriate, and deeper inquiry from the models themselves so that it can actually help support true, meaningful, and aligned action on the ground that can save lives.
So interesting. I'm going to have to read this research article for myself, and it's so interesting how it's being applied in a very tangible and meaningful way. Only 33%, 27% on average of best practice standards decision-making in these conflict areas.
Yes, and I wish I had the chart already that would show the improvement that we're seeing. It's
cool.
a little too early for that, but we're on the path to be able to show a pre and post of this same kind of data and how training the models on flourishing benchmarks that include deep domain expertise from some of these really challenging areas can actually uplift the model behavior and capacities.
Wow, very interesting.
If I can just call out that Gemini is the highest scoring by far, almost double the lowest values. So good job.
Well done.
Right.
Well done.
Thank you.
I know you were responsible for this part of the training
Personally.
there, so that's great.
Well, and honestly, pushing it further too in terms of domain expertise, this kind of brings on our next panelist, Dr. Ehi. Dr. Ehi, wondering about an example of AI that has supported your indigenous communities in areas like climate adaptation or well-being. And if there are no examples, can you describe how AI has perhaps missed its mark in this domain?
Well, it's actually gone in both directions.
Both directions.
We still have AI platforms that produce a lot of ancestral connections to environment that look plausible, but are just made up by a platform that knows nothing about it. And when we read that as Indigenous or as Māori particularly, I'm looking through it going, I don't know where this has come from. And people from mainstream sectors use those and take those up as evidence for making decisions. Another example is earlier this year, I had a contract offered to me. I won't say who from, but for exchange for the equivalent of a month's salary, they would have in perpetuity and total control of all Atua Matua content and all sub-licensing. Those types of contracts are being generated from companies that are using AI to extract information from Indigenous tribes. That group, if they turn up in New Zealand, will lose their head. So they're not going to be welcome here for a long time. However, it kind of points to the idea that some of the AI platforms are being used as a replacement for people to colonize and to manipulate and extract information from Indigenous people. I don't know how to cut the head off of a machine as easily as I do a person that turns up. So it's a bit of a different kind of problem to solve, but we'll get there. Where it can work is when governance comes first. In Aotearoa, our communities have been building sovereign data infrastructure for years. It's nothing new to us at all. And it's with the mandate of our people. We have a data sovereignty group in New Zealand called Te Kāhui Raraunga that's been in existence for over a decade. And more particularly, it's been used in the last 6 or 7 years in a far more public domain. And it has 95% of all Indigenous content from Māori tribal groups are administered by this organisation. So we've been moving for a while. And when you can get that type of governance alongside an AI tool that allows us to monitor our rivers, look at climate adaptation, language revitalisation is another one. We've got one group here, Te Hiku Media, that have been using an AI platform to not only gather ancestral discussions from elders, but it also allows real-time translation at 92% accuracy, which is crazy levels. So there are other examples, but in essence, what we're looking at here is that when it comes to looking at how AI can deliver useful opportunities for us, the proof point we're working from is that AI can either increase extraction or it can bring stewardship. And with this governed infrastructure, we could scale stewardship instead of extraction. We could strengthen our position by using AI. So it's in that situation right at the moment where it can go either way. And we're trying to influence it to come towards collective benefit and for a number of not only Indigenous people, but people in general to benefit from what this could look like. One other example I can throw at you is that we've been looking at ways to, and have been, actually, we've finished the documents on building an Indigenous biodiversity index. And we've asked AI to monitor, review, and return what all non-Indigenous biodiversity indexes look like and how we could align some of our thinking next to it. Funnily enough, none of us are from Sweden and New Zealand that are Māori at the same time, maybe one or two. So Linnaeus and the 18th century version that they've got, we're a little more subjective and relational in the way we want to align with biodiversity. So having AI as a tool to work those two has been great. So there's plenty of things that we're doing, but there's also some stuff that we're not happy about.
Very interesting. Thank you for that perspective and like pointing out the almost data piracy of machine learning, kind of taking our knowledge and then trying to charge us for reading it. It's quite interesting in that way. Maybe. We'll discuss more of that about the risks. But before we do that, Paul, can you wrap up this section on AI value creation by answering the question, in impact metrics, climate metrics that investors use, how can AI be applied?
Sure, happy to jump in and really appreciate the tangible examples that Stacy and Craig and Ravi and Madeline and Dr. Ehi have brought. And so please dig deeper into each of their themes and programs and organizations because we can only cover so much in short a time. So how I'll sort of tie this together is especially on Dr. Ehi's connection to the real world and living in the real world. This is a real world picture I'm about to show you called the Missouri Lead Belt. So I want to thank Leona Lan of our team, who is a specialist in geolocation and tracking all of these 1.5 million sites across the US. And you can see specific property names of mine tailings and a lead belt mining district, Superfund site, and Superfund sites are things that have been around since President Jimmy Carter in the 1970s. And John Sawhill, one of my mentors at McKinsey when I worked there, and later at the Nature Conservancy and previously at New York University, he was the first Superfund director under President Jimmy Carter to identify these sites and continue to grow them and figure out what solutions are possible. And the reason why these toxic sites are important and why AI can be a force for good is to, one, connect to where they are. So Amir, our moderator, is very humble. So what he hasn't told you, his PhD in process is about cross-sector solutions and bringing these community impacts together. So not only where you go to school and what the school outcomes are, how are the hospitals proximate? This came up during COVID, where there weren't enough rural hospitals close to the COVID cases, and the ones in the urban area were overrun with a number of people that they had to serve. And so the waterways carry these toxic elements and contaminants. And the good news is, as we rate there's more than 50,000 water utilities in the U.S., and most of them provide pretty clean water, low contaminants or contaminants that don't hit you. But the challenge is that the government policy on what the appropriate limits are way above what causes cancer, for example, sometimes 10 times, 20 times, 40 times higher than the rate that will cause cancer is the acceptable limit into the environment. So there's a great opportunity here to take these 1.5 million toxic sites, intersect them with the 84,000 census tracts. We connect them to more than 250,000 bonds that are issued, mini bonds, corporate bonds, and the like. And that allows impact investors one, to invest in places that might be more resilient, close the gaps where they're more risky and need to be more resilient, or integrate with climate action plans that cities have that are underfunded as well. So most climate action plans are 80 to 90 to 100% unfunded or underfunded. So a multi-sector solution is what's needed to bring all this together. And so everything that you've heard are different pieces of the integrated puzzle that have to come together for us to realize the human flourishing that Stacy has shown us is possible.
Yeah, and just to chime in on that, for this first 60 minutes, we've heard perspectives from our expert panelists over climate, health, and investing. For our final 30 minutes here, as we kind of wrap it up, it's important to identify the risks and guardrails to AI itself, everything AI in terms of energy generation, energy consumption, water usage, things that society is concerned about. Before moving on, just for those of you joining us online, I would like to reintroduce our expert panelists before moving on to this final section of risk of AI. But again, next to me here is Stacy Lawson, co-founder of Positive AI Labs and Benevolent AI Future. We have Craig Wickner, managing partner of Farmland LP. Ravi Jain, of previously the chief technology officer and product manager of Tapestry, Google X's Moonshot project for the electrical grid, and is now working on the Stealth project at Google X. We have Abby Young, who works for the Bay Area Air District as a climate protection manager, and overseas, joining us from New Zealand, UK, and France. We have Dr. Ihi, leader of the Atua Matua in New Zealand, located in New Zealand. We have Madeline Evans, the director of Generation Investment from the UK, and Paul Herman, CEO of Hip Investor Portfolios. So we have 25 minutes left. There's a lot to kind of jam in. We also want time for Q&A from the live audience and audience at home. So this is going to be kind of round robin. I'm going to ask this general question to both panelists online and at home. But let's get started. So what is one concrete risk that you feel like the audience should know about AI? And then what are some of the things that you're doing to mitigate that risk by either early detection or change in behavior? So let's start with Stacy.
Okay. So there was some work done out of UC Berkeley, some research that wanted to undertake what is the current level of consciousness or wisdom that AI embodies, if that's a word I can use. Mm-hmm. And basically the results showed that most of the models were as wise as the average of the internet. Which is not really surprising because they ingest the entire internet and most written human materials. And so the fact that they would be basically demonstrating developmental level as same as the internet makes some sense. So basically the average human, the average of the internet, and AI are equally as wise. So we have a system that is highly, highly intelligent, very, very capable, with processing speeds that are thousands of times the human brain, but we haven't yet achieved a system that is wise and can guide us and be a partner and collaborator as it relates to human flourishing. So I'm a little bit repeating myself, but this is very much the emphasis and the central part of our work, which is how do we make sure that the alignment work that is being done, not just in the large labs, but with anyone who's building a purpose-built system or a bot or an application on top of a frontier model, right? How do we make sure that safety training isn't our bar? Safety training is absolutely necessary, but definitely not sufficient. Mm-hmm. And the comment earlier about this trade-off between extraction and stewardship, I think, is a really, really central frame. Like, how do we move our collective perspective from extracting a whole bunch of data and then using it for really phenomenal capacities? There's no doubt about that. I'm a huge techno optimist, but make sure that we're doing it in a way that's stewarding and leveraging the cumulative wisdom of humanity collected over millennia, and actually also prioritizing embedding that wisdom, human values, ethical clarity, compassion, etc., into the models themselves, both so they can support our flourishing and also so that we can get the most out of the models in terms of the ultimate human value and planetary flourishing, right? So I would say that's one of the biggest risks, but also one of the very most powerful opportunities that we have yet to seize as a collective if we choose to do so.
Thank you for that. And it's good to point out, too, average knowledge of the internet, from my understanding, being a young millennial, internet's only been around since the 90s, maybe 30 years, so a lot of knowledge has happened before that, and maybe 30 years isn't enough time to access all of that knowledge. So use the transitive property there on how smart AI could possibly be, because we're still the ones holding the reins here.
Could I add one teeny little piece, which is while the models ingest a massive amount of data, they're only trained on and mostly upsampled on the two largest sources are Reddit and Wikipedia, mostly male-generated white Western perspectives.
Yes.
So by virtue of just the sort of natural training state these days, we're reiterating and reinforcing certain perspectives and points of view that get us to that average of the internet, but not necessarily to the stewardship that we need in order to serve the planet and its people.
So interesting to see how your work is mitigating risks, especially for these new and shifting goalposts, like in terms of the way that we interact with technology. So moving along with the last 20 minutes that we have, Craig, what can you tell us? One concrete risk, and what are you doing to mitigate that?
Great. I do want to segue from what you just said, and hearing Dr. Ehi speak about the 60,000 years of knowledge and wisdom about living with the earth, and most importantly, passing on that wisdom for 60,000 years, generation after generation, is really quite extraordinary. And I personally would love to have an AI representation of Dr. Ehi and the knowledge of the Maoris on my board of directors as an advisor to my company to get that outside perspective. And I'd be glad to pay him pay the organization a board fee to support them directly, not indirectly, through that. So I just want to thank you for your knowledge and encourage you to send me a contract. So I'll make this brief, but since I was young and I learned about climate change, I really felt that we were, as a society, in a race between ecological catastrophe and the singularity, to use Ray Kurzweil's term. And I was hoping that we would get to the singularity first, because the idea of the singularity is that the technology will solve our problems, right? Sounds kind of a fantasy, but we're in a logarithmic world now. And so I'm a little bit on the other side of, yes, there absolutely are risks to AI, but from my standpoint, like my brother is actually one of the top guys in safety at Waymo. So he's had his whole career in safety and is implementing it. My sister won't use AI. She's like, anyway, and my belief is that the people here, the people who care about impact, you're the ones who have to use the tool the most, the best. You guys are the ones who should be burning all those tokens and driving towards that solution so we can come up with the impact, the positive impact solutions that the world needs. We're on a freight train on the ecological side. Climate change is happening. It's causing problems. There's going to be food insecurity issues that are hard for people kind of outside of the know to know how quickly that's going to happen and what's going to happen there. So we need all of your oars in the water. You need to be using all of the tools at your disposal to create solutions that are going to make a positive impact. So I'm on the other side of like AI is not the threat. It's really just kind of going forward with the status quo is actually the larger threat, and AI is a potential tool for and we're small compared to a lot of the larger groups that are managing farmland. They're better funded. They've got more people. They've got software developers and marketing and pretty brochures and all that. And they're buying up farmland so that they can do large-scale monocropping of industrial stuff. And so, like, how my obligation, my moral obligation to my kids and your kids is to do everything in my power, use all my tools to actually create a regenerative agricultural solution on that. And whatever you guys are working on, whatever you're up to, I say I challenge you with the same.
Thank you for that, Craig. Yeah. Rolling along, Ravi, one concrete risk, and what are you doing to mitigate that?
Yeah, I think, going off of what the previous two folks have said, I think there are obviously risks, and, we need to use AI responsibly. One of the issues is around AI governance, and, Dr. He mentioned that. And I'll just mention that, there have been a lot of principles that have been developed for how to govern AI. One of them is being actually developed by the Society of Computer Professionals, Computer Science Professionals, 100,000 members globally. And they've issued sort of, guidelines on how to, keep in mind transparency and safeguards and accountability. And I think there's been a lot of work done in thinking on that. helped write that study. So I think those need to be incorporated more than only being principles. But on the other side, actually, I like what your framing was, which is not instead of preventing harms, also look at the positive side. And I think there, the risk I see is that there could be basically a digital divide. So what we would want, divide. So what we want is that the benefits of AI should actually be available to everybody and be usable by everybody, because then not only is that more equitable, but that's how you'll get sort of the creative solutions that cannot be developed in Silicon Valley or in one country, and I think those creative solutions will help unlock lots of things for us. And for instance, one of the areas that people have talked a lot about in this panel, and today being Earth Day, is climate resilience. And I think that is a problem that can be solved. We have to get our resources and our intuition and our imagination behind it. I mean, if we can send people to the dark side of the moon, slingshot them back to Earth, I mean, we can solve this problem too. So I believe that to make that possible, we really have to make sure there isn't a divide, and that the benefits of AI can be more widely accessible. And I think for that, there's training, there's democratization, many other ways, but that's something that needs to be done.
Ravi, thank you. So interesting to hear the differing perspectives, and just like the room, some people are holding up 2 fingers, some people are holding up 8, maybe some 11, but including a toe. But regardless, Abby, really interested in hearing your perspective, especially from the climate side with all of your involved work. What can you tell us about one concrete risk and suggestions for mitigation?
Sure. From where the Air District intersects with AI really is on data centers. So, by 2030, about 12% of all electricity in the United States is going to be used by data centers, and AI is what's driving that demand. In the Bay Area, we're seeing data centers coming online very rapidly, and they're all pretty much in the size range of about 50 to 100 megawatts. Now, just for a sense of scale, 100 megawatts is enough power to power roughly about 80,000 homes. So this is a lot. And data centers by design cannot lose power. So when they come online, they build enough backup power to cover 120 to 130% of their normal electric demand. That backup power, with very rare exception, is diesel generators. So we're seeing diesel generators in California over the last 9 years, about a gigawatt of diesel generators to be attached to data centers, which is equivalent of powering a city about the size of San Francisco. Now, the scary thing is, in the next 5 years, we've got about 19 more gigawatts of diesel generators that are being proposed. This is the air quality and public health challenge that because this is being driven by AI, that we're facing. Now, it's backup power, right? But it does run in times of power outages. It runs regularly for testing and maintenance. And in California, data centers are considered small power plants. Because of this amount of backup diesel generation, in times of grid stress, data centers can be paid to take themselves off of the grid and power themselves by their backup power system. Now, in the Bay Area, a lot of these data centers are being placed in or near communities that are already overly burdened by air pollution. So low-income communities, communities of color, this creates a real environmental justice issue. What can we do about this? The Air District can require that the backup generators are as clean as possible, but they're still diesel. And diesel exhaust, by the way, is the most harmful air pollutant health-wise. So UC Riverside did a recent study looking at Virginia, which leads the country in data centers, and modeled the health impacts of all the current data centers running their diesel generators at only 10% of their allowed levels. And that study found that the diesel emissions just from that would increase asthma rates by about 14,000 cases a year and add a public health burden of about $220 to $300 million a year. We cannot separate AI from this diesel problem. So, what's the solution? And I'd like to return to something, I'm almost done, to something that Paul said. In the Bay Area, we've got about 90 different local climate action plans. Almost every city and county has one. And as Paul said, they are not funded. So if, there could be a workable or palatable solution while we're figuring out how to solve this problem, could be that some very large companies that are driving this AI arms race that are backing away from some of their climate commitments could potentially invest in some of these local climate programs to offset some of these emissions.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that too, just like from Craig's example of Microsoft purchasing carbon credits to progress climate action measures. If there's anything from Google, not that I'm sure there is, but if you have any concrete examples, that'd be great to hear about. But before that, from your example, you said that only 10% of backup power is being utilized. Can you tell us anything about the transparency of backup power? Are these data centers
We have
reporting?
no idea how often they're running their generators. There's no reporting. It's opaque. So it's even from the Air District. We don't know how often they're being run or maintained. But I can tell you from personal experience that a couple months ago we work. The Air District is at about halfway between here and the Salesforce Tower. So we were all, working at our desks, and all of a sudden this horrible smell started coming through our HVAC system. And we're the Air District, so we have a pretty sweet HVAC system, right? And everyone's like, oh my God, they must be tarring the roof. What's happening? So we checked with facilities. It turns out the data center across the street was testing their diesel generators, and the black cloud that had gone up in the air had settled on our roof. So we just shut off our HVAC system for about an hour. But what if we were a schoolyard?
Yeah.
What if we were an assisted living facility? So these are some of the realities that we just have to figure it out. And to the extent that AI could help us figure this problem out, would be really, really awesome. Yeah. Exactly.
That's great, and like we said, it's really important to identify the risks and also benefits. So it's really nice to deliver that silver lining. And thank you for the tangible example. We'll move on to our panelists joining us online, and a similar question. We'll start with Dr. Ehi. What's one concrete risk that you're seeing, and how would you go about mitigating that risk?
Firstly, Craig, we'll talk.
I'm glad to visit you if you promise not to chop off my head.
No promises.
So that's the problem. I can't promise that one. And I do eat a fair amount, so it could be quite hard on your farms if we come over that way, but we'll talk. Anyway, currently at the moment I'm advising to the IPCC. I'm working alongside the Wellcome Trust in London. I'm lecturing at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and I've been advising to Google X for the last 4 years, and I'll continue to do that. I think I just enjoy how geeky some of them are. Not you, Ravi, you're quite cool. I've met you. And I'm trained in systems dynamics and lecture at Case Western out of Cleveland. With all of this background training and our attempts to educate society in general, the concrete failure remains the same, is that knowledge is taken without our consent.
Okay.
It's laundered through models, then sold back to the very same communities it was taken from. I think what we need is not a public-private partnership, but an Indigenous public-private partnership with Indigenous nations seated as peer sovereigns from day one, not consulted later on as stakeholders once the architecture's already been set. We need to be there right at the start. It's come up as part of the title of why I'm here, but the Atua Matua program that we built in 2007 was to address population health, but health is a dirty word in almost every native community because it's used to punish them and control them by most governments saying, look, here's the stats that we've been obtaining and you're a massive drain on society. We're also a hell of an opportunity to contribute to the development of AI, but not many people are that interested or understand what that could look like. 18 months ago, we started down another path of building AI for humanity. This one, we've partnered with a chap called Ron Widener, who some of you might know. He's out of the Bay Area, and he's been awesome. And we had to develop that level of trust and rapport to know that he wasn't going to take our information and use it in his own way. Mm-hmm. And to this point, I can probably only count 3 people in the last 30 years that haven't done that to us. Mm. That's a pretty poor outcome for the number of people we've worked around. Ron is one of the people we trust implicitly. So he's working towards some great things with us. But still, sometimes we have to walk away from arrangements that are incompatible with Indigenous governance. I think we need to embed into the architecture every new relationship, every new decision. Some of them have to stay in human hands, especially if it involves sacred knowledge or ceremony or the well-being of future generations. We can't hand that over to a machine. These aren't optimization problems. They're relational. And if you want to be in a relationship, you've got to be there in person. Despite the fact that I'm delivering to you on Zoom and it makes me uncomfortable as hell. Actually, to be honest, I'm sitting here in running shorts, but with a business shirt on and my dog. Because you can see that I've got running shorts on, but the business shirt just doesn't match up. But, however, these platforms are useful to deliver ideas. But we're still having, a major number of issues with our information being taken without us knowing about it. I'm hopeful that won't continue too much longer.
Well, Dr. Ehi, despite being quote-unquote uncomfortable, that was a very powerful example, and I appreciate you delivering it. And it gives us all something to think about, especially as we navigate sharing knowledge and ownership and property rights, something that I think humans have had to navigate for all of time, but we can think about how we continue to do that thoughtfully. As we are in these final moments, let's hear from our final 2 panelists. Madeline Evans, same question. One risk that you concretely see from AI, and what are you doing to mitigate it?
Working specifically in knowledge work, maybe others share this, but I'm quite worried about the potential for humans to lose their critical thinking capabilities. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to be deliberate about what we outsource and what we don't to AI models. I love the idea that before the Industrial Revolution, we didn't have to go to the gym because we were constantly working our bodies, and now we do. And how will we think about that from a mental perspective in the age of AI? So I think, taking the responsibility for continuing to improve our own critical thinking feels very important.
That's very tangible. I think one thing too, we were talking about computer integration and the different ways of interacting. Am I interacting through a chatbot like ChatGPT? Am I letting my AI agent have access to my directory within my computer? All of these have differing levels of critical thinking that is applied to it. But all to say is that if you do not go through the validation aspect, it's still your work. So if you deliver some sort of AI message and you say, my AI messed up, clearly it is you who messed up, and you have to go through the validation and can't just say, my dog ate my homework, sort of excuse. Thank you for that message, and I am with you on that, Madeline, of I'm fearful of the deterioration of critical thinking. So final risk and mitigation question goes to Paul Herman of HIP Investors.
All right, thank you.
Just a second. I just wanted to say we've reached the point in our program where we only have time for one more answer, and it goes to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll make this count, and it'll be a 3-part answer. One risk is that traditional agencies that we trust, like credit rating agencies, have essentially a 0% correlation to climate threat and resilience. So this needs to get addressed. This is a market inefficiency. And so this is one core risk to always trust the traditional sources of information, look for new information. And as Ihi said, Indigenous is one source of that partnership. A second risk is the underfunding or lack of funding for true climate action. And so whether you're issuing grants as a foundation, whether you're a corporation that can do a public-private partnership with a city or community where you're an employer, whether you're in private credit and can do loans that have positive return on investment for city projects in building efficiency, HVAC systems, heat pumps, and the like. Or even there are some private equity opportunities here as well. That is a second risk to be addressed. And so these are all case examples in the new Bay Area Air District Regional Climate Action Plan that was led across 90 cities and communities that Abby described. And the third risk is to keep this conversation going in a tangible way. For those of you on YouTube, you're asking very intelligent questions. I'm going to invite the panelists to reply to some of those on the YouTube channel. And in San Francisco, you have physical in-person networking right after this to do that, create new relationships, forge new partnerships, and as I used to say when I did consulting at McKinsey and CSE Index, pilot Friday. So think of your idea on Monday, design it on Tuesday, detail it out on Wednesday, and pilot Friday. And so by piloting new actions that we've heard many examples from Stacy and Craig and Ravi and Abby and Madeline and Dr. Ihi and of course Amir, thanks for all of your leadership, and let's up to all of us to keep pushing forward and bringing solutions.
Thanks, Paul, for that powerful closing message.
Before we have to say goodbye to our Zoom participants, we want to raise a glass to you and say thank you. We're deeply, deeply grateful for what you have brought, what all of the panelists have brought, but also what you bring as an audience. The critical thinking, the connection to community, these are things that we need to build into our daily lives. And to the extent that the Business and Leadership Forum, the extent to which the Commonwealth Club can be part of building that community, we invite it, we request it, we want to share it, and we thank you so much. Paul in particular has, HIP Investor has done so much to build this incredible panel. It's just, I think all of us feel like we could go on for another 3 hours.
Yeah.
It's just so meaty and in depth and in so much helpful commentary. So hey, let's do it again. It's Climate Week this week, but there's more of those. They come up again and again. It's Earth Day, so maybe our last gratitude is to Mama Earth, and we'll spend some time, those of us that are here in person, making some gestures that way. But to the three of you, we wish you a happy Earth Day, and bye for now.